On giving advice to beginners. Fortunately, in fishing, we are beginners all. Fishing is not like billiards, in which it is possible to attain a disgusting perfection. It is not like chess, in which a sharp line seems to be drawn between those who play badly enough to enjoy the game and those who play so well that they have lost all spirit of adventure and haggle over pawns like misers over pence. The older a fisherman grows, the more conscious is he that he has much to learn, and he lays aside his rod in the end as a man dies, knowing that all his effort has left him but a bungler. The better a fisherman is, the more conscious is he of his imperfections, and consequently the more shy of giving advice to others. He is also likely to have learnt that the chief pleasure of fishing is to be still beginning, and, unselfishly, he will be very unwilling to steal from a beginner any of the delight of finding out for himself. Long as the road is, distant the happily unattainable goal, the fisherman who has relished each stage of his journey feels that he is cheating his friend if he shows him a short cut. He is more inclined to give too little advice than too much. The way of the beginner, of the man who is really beginning to be a beginner, is consequently hard. It must seem to him that he is among priests who are determined to keep the mysteries of their cult. I fished a little while ago with a man, not in his first youth, who had wasted the flower of his life on business and golf and gardening and motoring and marriage, and had, in this way, postponed his initiation far too long. It was his second season. In his first season, he had caught 6 trout. This season, he had begun with hope and continued with determination, but he had caught no fish and was a little disheartened. His master had been much too good a fisherman. It is only young know-all who tries to tell everything, but this man's initiator had been so good a fisherman that he had hardly told his pupil anything at all. He had picked for him one of several second-hand rods, a small reel, a very fine tapered line, and a handful of mixed flies, and had put him by the river to catch trout. I watched him fishing, examined his weapons, and decided that last season's 6 fish had been 6 several miracles. With that rather whippy rod, that fine line, and that diminutive reel, his master could have done very well, but they were not the instruments to make casting easy for a middle-aged man who had not been apprenticed in boyhood. This unlucky beginner had been told to keep his fly dry, and had been allowed to see his master doing this, but had not been told the secret of the oil bottle, which his master is able to despise. Accordingly, he approached the water, a little stream with no cover, whisked his rod backwards and forwards as fast and as hard as he possibly could, and then, with a colossal effort, lifting one foot from the ground and striking forward with all his strength, he tried to send his fly out. The result varied a good deal, because the final effort was made without any regard to the position of the whirling line above his head. If his cast had failed to entangle itself while it was being used in an attempt to whip the air into cream, it hit the water pretty hard. If it had time to straighten in doing this, which was seldom, the fly immediately dragged. If it fell in loops, the poor man withdrew it with an additional splash. Here was a case in which, speaking as one beginner to another, something had to be said. He was so downcast that he had even allowed me to cut about 4 yards of the taper off his line, so that the weight of the heavier part compelled the rod to do some work. It was a pleasure to see his surprise at the result. The hint that speed through the air was unnecessary cured his wild rod-wagging, and the suggestion that he could always tell if he had made a decent cast by noticing if the pull of the line would take out another yard was enough to make him discover for himself the trick of shooting. The next suggestion was of a more questionable character. It was that it was just as well to learn to catch fish with a wet fly before attempting the more delicate, though often easier task, of catching them with a dry. Within 5 minutes of wetting his fly, and abandoning his more violent forms of exertion, he had a rise from the best fish any of us saw that day. The effect of this rise was curious. It paralyzed the fisherman. Up came the trout, with a head as big as my fist. The rod bent, the fish was on. But the fisherman was like a man who had seen a vision. He stood, open-mouthed, for a great many seconds, then dropped his rod point and began winding that ridiculous little reel. The line, of course, fell slack, and when, in response to urgent and perhaps regrettable cries, he lifted his rod point again, the fish was gone. It had, however, turned him into a different man. Before, he had been asking whether it was not true that some men could never become fishermen. Now, he already regarded that fish as his, and was prepared to fish for it forever. He subsequently caught a little trout, but remembering that monstrous head, rejected it as unworthy. There will be no stopping him now. His discouragement had gone from him, but his eagerness for knowledge was embarrassing to one who was determined not to tell him more than was good for him. Indeed, he refused to be offended when told that stamping on the bank in casting was as bad as showing himself to the fish, though I fancy he did not believe it. He had a notion that he would fish better if he knew the names of his flies, and that evening I arranged them in his box for him, while he made a plan of the box on a bit of paper and wrote down their names in the right places. I warned him to copy Ulysses and to put wax in his ears when he heard men talk of flies, knowing, of course, that he would not do this, but would add to his collection every time he passed a tackle shop in town. We came to talk of knots. I had to show him the turl and the easiest of all knots for fastening a line to a cast. He forgot them, I was glad to see, at once. I should otherwise have felt I was swindling him. Enough that he should see that it was possible to put on a fly so that it would not dangle or slip off, but too much if I had deprived him of the delight of learning for himself, by solitary experiment, how to do it. Not for anything would I lose my own happy memory of making sure of the blood knot with a long-suffering piece of string. That is the only honest way to treat beginners, to fend off from them, where you can, utter discouragement, but not on any account to tell them too much. They may think your reticence secretive. 20 years later they will, if they have not forgotten it, understand that you are defending not your secrets, but their pleasure. On talking to the fish. I wonder whether all fishermen, without knowing it, talk to their fish. When with a companion, they seem in talking to him to find relief from an excitement that must otherwise come out in a monologue. A gilly I know says that all men he has carried a gaff for swear all the time they have a fish on, with the exception of 2 parsons. One of these grunts, and the other talks mush in such a way that if you did not know him you would think he was using bad language. I have heard a small boy adjuring his float to bob your brute, and a small girl, who did not like taking fish off the hooks, apologizing to a perch for snatching away the bait which he was visibly on the point of taking. Pike, certainly, are seldom caught in silence. The language used to them is not polite. They look for hostility and are met with it. Many an angler more than half believes he's heard them answer back. When a pike comes up out of the water, opens his great white mouth and shakes his head, it's hard to believe that he does not actually bark. A month or 2 ago, I was fortunate in overhearing nearly the whole of the catching of a salmon. I was eating my sandwiches behind a rock when a salmon fisher, who did not know I was there, came to the head of the pool. There was no one else in sight, and I was startled by hearing him say, not at all below his breath, "Just by the rocks, the place." He began casting at once, and at the 2nd or 3rd cast I heard, "Ah, looked at it, did you? Wondered what museum I'd stolen it from. Why, I wanted to show it to you. Well, take another look at it. It'll be coming to you in a moment. Now, where are you? Hurry up, or the gates will be closed. Last chance of seeing the celebrated Johannes Scotus. There you are. Why not take the beastly thing? Not good enough for you? Rubbish. Now, all the wise men say I ought to offer you a smaller one of the same, but you and I know better. You want to see this one again, and you shall. Now then, out of the smooth and into the stream. Are you waiting for it, or have you gone off to lament your lack of appetite? Ah! 1 to be ready, 2 to be steady, 3 to decide that even if he takes it striking's a mug's game, and 4 to tighten rather firmly. At this point, the fisherman came down through the shallows at the head of the pool with his rod point well up, his reels screaming, and his line taut to something moving rapidly far down the pool. The fisherman hurried over the boulders. "Would you? Would you?" I heard him ejaculate defiantly, evidently attributing to the fish responsibility for an awkward stumble. He got below his fish, and I could see from his lips that he was talking continuously, though I could hear nothing but the stream. I picked up my gaff, and keeping well away from the river, went down and took up a position not far from the fisherman, but well out of his way, so that I could act as gilly for him if he wanted one. I suppose he must have heard the noise of my arrival, for he looked for half a second in my direction, but he was far too much engrossed in his contest with the fish not to forget my presence almost instantly. He and the fish were alone together. There was no one else in their world. "Yes, my dear," I heard him say, "you're perfectly right. The big stone is the place to make for. Get the line round that and we part company. But I lost a relation of yours round that stone, and just for that very reason. Steady now. Not going to lose you. No, no, my lad. You're on the wrong side. You should have gone on the other side and got the gut on the sharp edge." "What? You think you'll settle down there, do you? Tire me out, eh?" "We'll see about that. Now then, this way with your head, my friend. Just feel the current on your cheek. So, out you come. Upstream? Delighted. As far as you want to go. Nothing keeping you. 60 yards of backing on this reel." "Oh, so you don't want to go any further after all?" "Well, my dear, you'll have to work hard to keep where you are. There's good strong water coming down there." "What? Dropping already?" "You might have had the decency to drop this side of the stream. You can't think that I'm going to lug you across." "Ah, this little backwater here, just the place to land you. If you won't see it, I can't make you. But, look here. If you go much further, you'll have to take a nasty toss into the pool below, and I shall have to get down before you. It's obliging brute. Another 2 yards, and there'll be no stopping yourself. Now then, easy. Easy." The fisherman slid down over the rocks just in time to keep the line clear as the fish rolled through the fall into the low pool. Few things are more astonishing than the gymnastics of which even an elderly man finds himself capable when he has a good fish at the end of his line. The fisherman went down over those rocks like a boy, and, with the fish still on, was moving steadily down the low pool before I had had time to make up my mind to follow him. I had no fish to give wings to my feet, and took a minute or two to climb down. I found the conversation still proceeding, though its tone was much less friendly. "Tired, are you now? No more tricks of that kind. You spoiled 2 good pools for me. Couldn't you stick to the ring and fight it out handsomely in one? Turning the best pool of the river into a circus. It'll be a couple of hours before it's worth fishing. No, never that, never that. You wouldn't come into that backwater. Try this one. So, another yard, another foot. Not tired yet? Saw the gaff, did you? Didn't like the look of my face? I shouldn't have thought you had that much run left in you. Coming down again now. Turning over. Keep your head upstream. Round again. Thank you. Inshore with you. Over it. Now, my beauty." The fisherman lifted out his fish and carried it up the shingle. He turned to me. He was very hot and rather breathless. "He's not a bad fish," he said. 12 or 14 pounds, not more." He spoke in quiet appraisement. I'm sure that if I had told him that he'd been talking aloud to that same fish for the last 10 minutes, he would not have believed me. I wonder, is it so with us all?